Welcome to this video tutorial. Today I will talk about 3D characters. We will look at all the different vendors and resources and tools that allow you to create and import characters and use them in a game engine. Now we have a large lineup of characters here, and we will just go from left to right and just talk about each character, how they were created, and how they perform compared to the other characters. This first character here is called Izzy, and it is the sample character of iClone. You can get Izzy through the Unity Asset Store. You can simply download it for free and can try it out. Let's have a look at Izzy. You can see there's already a number of bones here, so the character is fully rigged. And you can also see that the individual clothing items are separate, which means you can easily disable them, and you can apply different shaders to each of those. Now, one thing to note is that if you disable one of these items, there's actually no mesh underneath, and that is, I guess, an optimization to make sure that if you animate the character, there is no skin poking through the clothing items, and that you also don't need to render those vertices underneath. Let's have a look at animating Izzy. Look at the base body, and we can already see there's a number of blend shapes here. All of those blend shapes relate to the face, so that we can animate facial expressions and open the mouth and so on, close eyes and so on. Now, I don't see any blend shapes that map to the usual phonemes to use for lip syncing, so you would basically have to combine a number of these to get the results that you would need for lip syncing the character. I also have these two green buttons here. This is the functionality through a tool called Scale, which allows you to animate within Unity, and it simply allows me to show you the rig that is applied and the different bones within the character. You can see that Izzy has different bones for different toes. You could animate those if you wanted to, even though they're invisible individual fingers. And for the face, you can see that there is no bones to drive the face whatsoever, and that's because we have all the blend shapes. And usually you only have one or the other. You either have bones to, for example, open the mouth, or you have blend shapes that will drive all the different animations in the face. All right, now let's have a look at the tool itself that is used to create characters like Izzy, and that is called the Character Creator by Reallusion. And I have to say, overall, I really like the kind of functionality it provides. And you have a number of different items that you can apply. This is only the base, some of the base items that are for free when you, well, not really for free, but when you purchase the software. So there is an upfront investment that you have to do to get iClone and Character Creator, but then it comes with some base items. Now, there's also some morphs that come with it, so you can shape the character to your liking. So, create a really slim or really obese character and so on. So you can change all of this at different settings. And then one other neat thing is that Character Creator integrates with substances, and that means you can easily add decals, freckles and dirt and so on, and logos and so on all those different clothing items. And you could easily, for example, change this skirt from like some fabric to leather or to a jeans skirt, so that you're really only purchasing sort of the base shape of the clothing items, and then you can really customize it to your liking. So I like all of these aspects really about Character Creator, and it really make them stand out. Now to the downside, and the downside is really the whole ecosystem of iClone and Reallusion is something that I'm not really in favor of, and that is because there's quite a large upfront investment. Because in order to actually export those characters from Character Creator to something like Unity, you need a license for 3D Exchange 7 pipeline, which is sort of an intermediary program that allows you to export to different file formats. And in our case, we need FBX export to get into Unity, and that costs right now $549. And then you also have to look at purchasing some content. And there you have two content stores. So there's a marketplace, which kind of has really mixed quality and a lot of auto models that I really kind of stay away from. And then you have the content store from Reallusion. And here you have a number of packages that you can purchase. And let's just have a look at here, like realistic human faces. And you have different licenses for these. And there you would need the more expensive license, which is the export license, in order to export the content then to FBX and to use them in a game engine. Just have a brief look at this. And I feel like in order to get started with a platform like iClone, you would really need to invest also in quite a bit of content. So there's faces and then different outfits and so on to really have a variety of characters that you can create. So I would probably estimate you would need anywhere between $1,000 and $1,500 to really get started with iClone and Character Creator and the Exchange, 3D Exchange software. Now this is the first character in the first platform, and I think overall the quality of the character is really good, and it could really be worth the investment if you have a larger project and a game where you know you need a number of characters. All right, let's move on. The next 6 characters here are from a different ecosystem, and that is, I guess, the sort of most direct competitor to iClone, and that is DAZ 3D. And there's a software called DAZ Studio. You can see here. And in DAZ Studio, you have fairly similar functionality in that you have different morphs, so you can shape the body and the character to your liking to really look very different. You can add a lot of content, different content, hair, and so on, and you have to purchase all of those items. Now, the biggest difference, I would say, is that DAZ Studio as a software is free. You can just download it. And what you would need to invest in is the content of the characters and the accessories and the clothing. Let's have a look. So you have thousands of items here. And you also have different generations, so Genesis 2, 3, and 8 characters, and those sort of are the different generations of content that exist. And I'd say going back as far as Genesis 2 is still feasible right now, and I can show you right here. This is Genesis 3 and Genesis 8 as a comparison. And then we have a character here that is Genesis 2, and I think that character still looks perfectly fine to use in Unity in your games. And there's really just sort of minor differences in the resolution and the quality of the textures and the rig that's underlying in terms of how detailed the rig is and how detailed some of the morphs, so the blend shapes are that are being used. But overall, I think it is also a really viable solution, and that's what I personally use for my projects. So you can really create a large number of characters that look different enough so that you can really populate your game or your simulation. I think it's also one of the few tools that really allow you to create children as characters, because there is a package, a morph package that allows you to morph the character to anything between I'd say a newborn to a 100-year-old character, and I think it does a fairly good job of actually really morphing the body and the proportions of the body to that. Now, having said that, if you use DAZ Studio as a software, you really also have to purchase all of those morphs. And I think the biggest problem with DAZ Studio is that there's so much content available that it's hard to predict how those different pieces of content will fit together, and whether the clothing and the hair and so on will actually look good in Unity. And you can see here that there's like different ways of showing and shading the hair. I think hair is probably the biggest problem in using the DAZ content, and sometimes really items don't fit that well, and it's really sort of hit and miss to figure out which kind of items are good to use in Unity and are not complex enough. And there's really a lot of different steps that you have to keep in mind. For example, decimating to make sure that some of the items are not too complex and really run well in terms of performance. But before I get into all of those details, I can also tell you that I've created a number of video tutorials that look at exporting animations and decimating characters and then integrating them in Unity. So I think I'll just leave it at that. And I just mention one more thing, and that is a character sort of a platform called Morph3D, which is basically the same characters as DAZ Studio produces. However, those characters are already integrated in Unity, and they're all available on the Unity Asset Store. So all of the different characters and morphs and everything that you find in DAZ Studio are for the most part also available in the Unity Asset Store. Now, this takes away a little bit of the customizability and some of the selection of clothing items and hairstyles and so on that you might find in DAZ Studio, but you have the advantage of not having to go through the export process, and all of those characters are already available in the asset store. Now you have the base characters, which is the MCS male and female, and you can download those for free and just try them out and see whether they fit your project. And then you simply purchase other character styles and other clothing items and accessories that fit your theme of a game or application. And the way this works is you have some scripts and basically a whole system of, let's say, attachments and morphs. So one of the big advantages is that all the morphs that you would have to purchase separately in DAZ Studio, you basically get with the base mesh, with the base character in Morph 3D. And you can, morph all the different things you need. You can create a really young character. So the youth morph that I was talking about earlier, you have down here, and you can really make those changes here within the Unity editor, and it works really, really well. And you also have levels of detail, and that's another big advantage, that you automatically get different levels of detail for your different clothing items and so on. So I think overall, it's a really good solution to get started with characters, and you don't really want to use an external tool, then Morph 3D is probably the best bet you have in terms of selection of characters, accessories, and also usability in terms of making sure that all the content actually works within Unity. One thing I have to note is that I'm not a big fan of the shader, the hair shader that's being used with Morph 3D. Kind of looks a little bit cartoony. There is no, it looks very choppy. But I think that's something that you can change as well, and you could just use the standard shader and play around with that to get other rendering, other shaders for your hair. All right, so this concludes DAZ Studio and Morph 3D, and we move on to Fuse. Now, Fuse is a bit of a tricky topic, just because I really like Fuse. It is part of the Adobe suite of software, and it comes as Adobe Fuse CC, and it is still in beta. Now, I really like the interface. I really like Fuse per se in terms of the functionality, because you can simply assemble your character in a number of different steps. So first of all, you have the different body parts you can assemble, and you can create zombies and all different sorts of things. And then you have all these morphs, so all these sliders here, where you can have facial expressions and really make changes to your body and the proportions of the character. And you put some clothing on, and you have, I'd say, a good selection of clothing items available, and different beards and accessories and whatnot. And then you can really go into texturing those items. So if I select the shirt now, again, I have integrated substances. So that's really giving you a lot of options to customize the existing piece of clothing and the texture. So we can add some dirt to it, some wear and tear, and really change all the colors and the patterns and so on. So that really gives you lots of flexibility. Once the character is finished, we can choose to animate with Mixamo, which means we can export the character and export it over to Mixamo, which is a service that was acquired by Adobe a while back, and that allows you to add animations and a rig to your character, and then export it to FBX. And that is quite useful. And then you end up with a character like this that already has a rig. Let's have a look at it. So here we have all the different clothing items, and you can already see that underneath here, again, there's some optimization where there's no body underneath, so that there's no skin poking through. And you can disable all those different clothing items. So for example, the eyewear, we can simply disable that. So that's pretty neat. Now let's have a look at the body and the animation. So first of all, we have blend shapes, and those really come from Mixamo. So you can export, you have the option there to export with blend shapes, special blend shapes. And you can already see there is like blinking and the brows and jaw and everything. So we have a lot of options where you can also then start lip syncing your characters if you need. And if we look at the rig actually is split in two here. There's an upper body, which is a bit unusual. You have the fingers individually, and then again, all the face is driven by blend shape, so there's no bones there. And you can also look at the bottoms. So again, then the rest of the rig for the legs. So all of this works really well. And I really like Fuse as a tool overall. And the best part of it, it's free at the moment. However, the biggest problem with Fuse is that it is not being officially supported by Adobe right now. It was developed and released in, I think, 2015. And then at some stage, Adobe decided that they want to spend their resources on other software and basically dumped Fuse. And there has been no updates in a long time. And really, it's very unclear of what the future of Fuse will be because there's no announcement from Adobe that they say, hey, we're going to shut it down completely, or we will make it open source, or who knows what's going to happen. And that's a big unknown, which kind of prevents me from really using it extensively. Because if you're in the middle of a project and all of a sudden, the tool that you've been using kind of gets completely discontinued and dumped somewhere, that's obviously not a good thing to do. So it's really hard to predict, and I feel like Adobe Fuse without Mixamo would also be only like half of the package, because if the characters are not rigged, that would be problematic. So really there's no telling of what the future of Fuse is. And I really feel Fuse could be the perfect tool for character creation in the future. And it's really a shame that Adobe decided that that's really not the case, because I really feel there's a number of decent tools out there like DAZ and iClone, but they all have their shortcomings. And I feel like Fuse addressed all of those shortcomings, but then just in the middle of growing and really making the tool amazing, they just stopped and said, nah, we don't really care about it. So I guess that was a business decision. Anyway, let's move on. Next tool is called MakeHuman. I'll show you the website here. It's called makehumancommunity.org. And it is an open source tool. That's good. The bad thing about it is that it hasn't been updated in just about a year. So the last release was 1.1.1 in 2017. But I'm not going to complain too much because it's absolutely free. It's open source. So I've been using it sparsely for certain projects. And overall, the quality, I think, of the characters cannot keep up with iClone and DAZ, but I think it's still pretty good for what it does. So you have all these different options here. So you have these different tabs of modeling, geometry, where you can add different clothing items. And I think the main problem is that the amount of clothing items and accessories that you can add is simply very limited. Once you've done all of that and you can like add all those morphs and really shape the body just like you did in Fuse and all those other tools, and then you can add a rig to it. In this case, a game engine is probably the one to go for, which is optimized. And then in the end, you can simply export to FBX. And the characters are going to look like this. And I have two characters here, and we can simply have a quick look at the character. So it's being rigged. And I think one of the downsides is that the clothing items all come out in one piece. So this is just one mesh. So there is no separate shirt and no separate pants and so on. And then we have the character itself. Again, you can see the mesh stops underneath the suit, which again is an optimization so that no skin is poking through. There is no blend shapes, so we cannot change any of the shape of the body in Unity. We have to basically re-export if we want a larger character or want to change the proportions. And when we look at the rig, we can see there is nothing sort of in the middle part. There's no hip bone or anything. It's really just the legs and arms and the mouth. And that also reveals one downside is there is no way to animate the face at all, so there's no blend shapes. And we also do not have any bones here that let you open the mouth or like move eyes. No, actually eyes we have because eyes are separate. So we can actually do something with them. And we could rotate those manually for animations. But other than that, sort of that's the limitation of those characters. So I think those characters would work fairly well in the background somewhere where you could have a fairly large number of those walking around and you can animate them. But the moment you actually need lip syncing or really use that functionality, then I think that's where MakeHuman falls short right now. But again, it's free, and I think it might be worth a shot for you if you look for some characters for your game. All right, let's move on. The next two characters are from Autodesk, and they're created through the Autodesk Character Creator or Character Generator, rather. And this tool is completely web-based, so you log into your Autodesk account, which you can create for free. And then you can create all these different designs for characters. And I think there is just one aspect of the characters that you need to think about, and that is there's paid content and there is free content. You can see this little whirly icon here, which means that this character was used a paid content. And if you want to export that character now, you actually have to purchase credits for your Autodesk account and then export the character, which makes it hard, because the moment you change just a little detail of the character and you change one of those paid items, then you have to pay again to export. That's a bit, I'd say, a bit annoying. Now, also, there is a difference between the characters in terms of export. So a paid character also receives higher resolution textures. And open up this character here. We see there's a few things that are individual items. All of those are right in the face, whereas the rest of the body here is just one mesh. So all of the clothing is just basically painted on and just integrated in the mesh. That means also there's just one material, which means there's only one shader driving the whole model. And that is obviously not great, just because you might want to use a different hair shader or a different shader for the clothing items, and then a different shader for the skin to really make the character look more realistic. And you cannot do this with this character because it's all just one shader. So you would probably just have to use some variant of the standard shader and just kind of dial everything down to make it look semi-realistic. All right, let's have a look. Now, one advantage of the paid content for Autodesk is that you have a number of blend shapes that you can export. And you can see up here is all of those phonemes that you use for lip syncing the character, and I think that's really handy. I really like that. And then you have a lot of other expressions like smiling and closing eyes and raising brows and so on. So all of that is available for the paid character, and I think that's really important. And let's have a look at the rig. And I think the rig overall looks pretty good as well. There's no individual toes, but you got fingers. And then again, all the facial expressions are driven by blend shapes, so there's no bones here. There's really just the head bone, so you can rotate your head. All right, now looking at the free content, you can see a big difference in terms of the quality of the textures, and really the quality of the mesh is also, it looks really blocky, and you can see the individual vertices. Something like the color here being just painted on looks really bad as well. So that's really just a character you could use from far away, from really far in the background, because if you get fairly close to the character, you really see sort of the lower quality of that mesh. It also doesn't come with any blend shapes. So if you look here, there's no blend shapes, and there is a rig, so rigs are still available for the free content, but that means there is no facial animation whatsoever. So the only thing you can do is rotate the head, but beyond that, there's just nothing you can do. All right, so this is Autodesk Character Generator. Now let's look at the next couple of vendors, and all of those are online platforms where you can just purchase scanned 3D characters. The first one is called Renderpeople. Renderpeople is a website that has a number of scanned 3D characters, and you also have some free sample downloads. So you have some rig characters here that you can download and try out. And I just downloaded Eric, and you can simply select Unity. You will get a Unity package and import that into your project. Now there's a number of other characters, and we just look for rig people, and you see they're all $99. There's no different licenses, so you really just purchase those characters. You have some children characters as well, and a variety of other characters. So all of that is pretty good. And let's have a look at Eric here. Maybe let's start with the rig. Rig looks quite good. You have individual fingers. And some facial bones here, so you can open the mouth, can move eyes and so on. So all of that is working, so that's good. There's no blend shapes. And as you can see, there's really only one item here, so one game object. So really it's just one mesh again, just like with the Autodesk characters, so that all of it is painted on. So all the wrinkles here in the shirt and so on, and the color, it's all just one mesh. So there's no applying different materials, it's just one material for the whole character. That's the downside, but I think overall Eric actually doesn't look too bad. I think the quality of the scan is pretty good, and at least I think it's a fairly decent standard character that you could use for your animations in your game. Now, since you don't have any blend shapes, you only have opening of mouth through the one bone there. Lip syncing is going to be a problem. I mean, you could have the mouth open and shut for some kind of speech, but it's not very realistic. So you would have to take into account how important that is for you. All right, let's move on. Next provider is AXYZ. And they have a number of characters available here. So we just go to AXYZ design. And under 3D people, you have Metropolis. And there you just need to look for rigged characters. And for the file format, if you want to use the character in Unity, I would recommend Motion Builder, which is FBX. The FBX file format. You have a number of others, so if you use, let's say, 3ds Max, then you could also use that format and then use the character in 3ds Max and then export. So that's, makes the pipeline more complex. But overall, sort of this is the kind of characters you can expect here, and there's a wide variety available. However, most of these characters are fairly old already. I recall looking at this website years ago, and basically most of the scans have been here for really quite a while. The character I have here is from 2014 that I purchased back then, and yeah, so I think the quality of the character in terms of the scan, so of the textures, is acceptable. It's fine. The main problem I have with the character is the hair. It's really it's a bit problematic to get this hair working. So I can show you what I did. And first of all, we have the mesh of the character, then a separate mesh for the hair, and there was just one transparent texture here, a black and white texture, which I then used alpha from transparency to kind of get it to work, because the other like colored hair, the brown hair texture, really was unusable. It was just really blocky, and there was just no way to really use that with a standard shader. So it might require a bit of fiddling, and I feel like this hair is really just too thin to kind of make the character look nice. But that's one problem with it. Again, one other problem is that, just like with the Renderpeople character, that it's just one mesh, so you have just one material available, so that you cannot have a skin shader and then a hair shader. Well, you can have a separate hair shader, but the clothing doesn't have different shaders and so on. So that's another problem. Let's have a look at the rig. So no blend shapes, and the rig looks okay. But when you look at it, there's absolutely no bone here that even lets you open the mouth or lets you drive the eye, so the character cannot look anywhere else. And since there's no blend shapes, there's really like no use for the face at all. There's no animations that you can achieve with this face. And that's a bit of a downside. Now again, I have to say this character is from 2014. There might be updates to those models in recent years from AXYZ design, but there's no way of telling really, apart from repurchasing some of the items. But there's also no real telling of how old those characters are. There's no sort by release date or anything like that. So it's really hard to determine, like, are some of those characters more recent, and are there any upgrades? Now, one thing you have to keep in mind, so again, we're looking for Motion Builder as a file format instead of 3ds Max. And for the license, you have to purchase an extended license for games in order to export it to Unity and to use in your application. So that makes the character more expensive, but that's what you would have to do in order to use those characters in Unity. All right, so this is AXYZ design. let's move on. The next one is from HumanAlloy, and we have two versions here, a high resolution character and a low resolution character. Let's go to the website. And we have a sample character here that you can download and use. And I really like that those websites really make free characters available. That really lets you try out those characters. And in this case, it's Darien. And we overall have to look for rigged and ready characters that have a rig applied already. And there's a number of characters available. You can see there's 2 pages, so there's about, I think, 15 characters or so available. But let's go back to Darien. Let's have a look at what the website says. So there's Autodesk FBX with bones, so that's good. 2 mesh resolutions, 40 and 70K polygons. And then the hair is the biggest difference. So one hairstyle has 700,000 polygons, which is a lot. And then the other one has 20,000. And then we have high resolution textures, 10 different masks. So all of that is like really good. Different separate shaders for like skin shader and so on. Let's have a look what it looks like in Unity. And I have to say I was actually quite disappointed by this character. Let's have a look. This is the high resolution character. First of all, let's look at the hair. This is way too detailed. Like every single hair strand is like a lot of detail, and it looks okay, I guess. Again, it's a similar hairstyle to what More 3D does in terms of like, there's not a lot of soft hair strands or anything. It's all just modeled, and but this is way too complex for some hair. So this would run horribly in your game if, like, for example, if you want to like deploy to Android or iOS, you would have a hard time rendering this. This would suck up all the performance of your application. The body is just one mesh, as with the other scans as well. So there is no separate mesh for the shirt or anything. I feel like the high resolution texture doesn't look as good as some of the other. Like if I compare this to the Renderpeople character, he looks much better than this scan here. So I think that's a quality difference. And let's have a look at animating this character. So no blend shapes. And then we have the rig here. Now the rig looks good just looking at it, looks fine. But when you look at this, somebody who created this rig clearly didn't set it up correctly. Like none of this really works. This one arm did work at some stage. Now it doesn't work. But really, some of the bones do work, but especially like the facial, the facial bones here don't do anything. They really just distort the whole mesh, and there is no actual animating these to make the character look nice. So right now you cannot really use, you cannot really animate the arms or anything. So this rig is completely borked. I'm not sure whether that's the same for all the characters, but this free character certainly doesn't instill confidence that that these characters from HumanAlloy are going to be usable in a game engine. So I would really caution from buying these, at least just based on this character. I don't really know that any of it works. So I think I'll leave it at that and move on to the last character. Now, the last character is sort of not from a particular large company or anything that produces a tool, but rather I think the last category of characters are different marketplaces for 3D models. And 2 that I selected here is CGTrader and then TurboSquid, sort of 2 of the big marketplaces where a lot of artists publish their 3D models. And it's really hard to give an overall impression of the quality there, because each vendor, each artist is different. Each character is set up differently. And I think there the most important thing is really to try to find one vendor, one artist that produces content that you like and that you're happy with to use. And then it's really just about purchasing from that person, because if you go to another vendor, everything could be completely different. So it's really just a mixed bag of quality, and you really have to decide on a case-by-case basis. So I just used an example here. I just saw a couple characters that I thought looked pretty neat, and I just purchased this character here, Army Girl from Alpenwolf on CGTrader. And I just use this as an example, and I think it's actually not a bad example. And you can see there's other characters, there's accessories, and so on. So this would be sort of the kind of content you're looking for. If it fits thematically, then you have a number of characters you could purchase so that there might actually be enough content for your game, because you really want to, similar art styles and things for your application. So let's have a look at this character, really just as an example. Let's start that, okay, the hair is different, is separate, so you could apply a different shader to that. That's good. And then the main body is just one mesh, which is interesting. But we have lots of different materials, so that's good. So you can actually apply different shaders and different materials to all those different items to make, the leather or the sort of the pants look different from the skin, so you can have a proper skin shader and so on. So that's really good. And that makes a lot of sense. There's no blend shapes, but let's have a look at the rig to animate, and that looks pretty good. Individual fingers, and we actually have quite a few bones in the face, so that we could open the mouth and start animating the character there as well. And I think that's that's really good. Now, I think the one thing that stands out here, what I would like to see some improvement, is that the character is not modular. So if I would want this character without headphones or without the the wristwatch or things like that, I would actually have to go back to like a 3D modeling program and remove those. So it would be nice if those could just be separate objects and I could just remove them. I think that would be probably the biggest upgrade, I'd say, to make this character pretty much perfect. And that would be something then where you would have to probably just contact the artist and ask, hey, could you make that change to the character? And then in turn, I would buy maybe 3 or 4 of your remaining models. So that's I think sort of the kind of way to approach purchasing on those market stores. You really find a vendor that you're happy with, and then you just purchase from them. And I think that basically concludes this tutorial about all different character tools and features. And really, there's sort of different categories. There's the marketplaces that I just mentioned. There's the websites with scanned characters that are all one mesh, that are probably mostly okay for like background characters. And then you have the actual like tools where you can customize your character. And I think if you really need flexibility in your game and create a larger number of characters, it's probably best to start investing or thinking about investing in one of those tools where you have the customization options available. And for some of these tools, I have some video tutorials available that really go into more depth into how to customize and what kind of pitfalls you need to look out for and how to integrate those characters then in Unity. Now, if you have any questions or if you have any other sources where you found 3D characters that you really enjoyed and liked, then please leave a comment below, and I'm happy to respond and have a conversation about that. And other than that, thanks for watching, and see you next time.